Until as recently as the 19th century, living near a European coastline was a risky proposition indeed. From bases dotted around the North African coast, marauding warbands of bloodthirsty pirates carried out merciless raids as far afield as Iceland, looting everything they could carry, seizing thousands of ships, and ripping over 1 million men, women, and children from their homes to be sold into a brutal life of slavery. In the face of this unstoppable onslaught of plunder, terror, and death, fear gripped the entire continent as villagers abandoned their homes in droves, leaving entire coastlines of Spain and Italy as depopulated ruins, and even some of the most powerful countries on earth were forced to pay the pirates tribute in what was one of the largest and most profitable protection rackets in history. Since the dawn of civilization, the Mediterranean Sea has been rife with piracy, the rich trade routes that stretch across its waters proving to be irresistible targets for men with the desire and ability to seize the wealth of others. Yet by the 15th century, it would be the people living along the coastlines of North Africa who found themselves uniquely placed to excel at and profit from piracy. Collectively known as the Barbary states, the areas covering modern-day Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli had a long seafaring tradition. With an abundant supply of able sailors, easy access to well-built ships, and fortified port cities to seek sanctuary in, the Barbary states were well suited to projecting naval power. With their homelands largely arid and resource-poor, the common man saw the increasing flow of wealthy European trading ships passing just a few miles off their shore as the perfect opportunity for enrichment. As trade between Europe and the rest of the world grew at a breakneck speed, a thriving pirate economy quickly began to develop right along the Barbary coast. The wealth these pirates extracted from European merchants, providing a reliable and plentiful source of revenue for the region, while at the same time swelling their ranks with gold-hungry new recruits keen to take part in the lucrative plundering. However, the piracy industry that rapidly blossomed in the region was firmly rooted in the now ancient feud between Christians and Muslims. The already dangerous situation began to rapidly grow out of hand following the completion of the Spanish Reconquista and fall of Granada, when in 1492 the Moors were finally expelled from Christian Spain. Angry at the fate that had befallen them, many of these Muslim exiles immediately threw their lot in with the Barbary pirates, greatly increasing the numbers and power of the pirate fleets, enabling them to bring most of the North African territories under their direct control. They were now not only pirates, but regional warlords. Now ruling over most of North Africa, the growing size and aggression of the pirate fleets became an existential threat to all of Europe, slowly but surely choking off the economic lifeblood of the continent. Yet dealing with this menace was no simple feat. The pirate leaders were not minor criminals who could simply be arrested or eliminated. They were mighty warlords in their own right, with access to their own private navies, backed up and supplied by a fully fledged state. Fleets containing thousands of pirates aboard dozens of warships trawled the waters of the Mediterranean in their hunt for plunder. However, the valuable trade goods that filled a ship's cargo hold was not their primary target. It was the human crew of ships that most interested the Barbary pirates. Christian captives could fetch a handsome price indeed at Ottoman slave markets dotted around Arabia, this trade in flesh making several of the pirate chieftains incredibly wealthy. The profit from selling on looted trade goods became merely a welcomed byproduct of slave hunting. The pirate fleets would seek out lightly guarded ships, sailing close before storming onto the enemy deck en masse, with some accounts saying that they even carried daggers in their mouth to appear as vicious and bloodthirsty as possible, and thus maximize fear. These hyper-aggressive tactics designed to subdue the enemy with as little resistance as possible. Those who surrendered would usually be spared. After all, it's simply poor business practice to needlessly kill valuable captives. However, those who resisted or encouraged others to resist would be made an example of without mercy, either hanged from hooks in front of the crew or brutally carved into tiny pieces. In 1551, the entire population of the Maltese island of Gozo was kidnapped, with 6,000 men, women and children sent to the slave markets of Tripoli. Just 3 years later, the Italian town of Vieste suffered a similar fate, with half the population enslaved, while the other half lost their heads. Prisoners fortunate enough to have wealthy friends or family could arrange for a ransom to be paid in exchange for freedom, so long as the ransom was more than the price a slave would fetch at market. However, for the poor majority, a grim life of slavery in a foreign land awaited. This practice of paying ransoms was widespread enough that churches across Europe began collecting donations to pay ransoms for local sailors captured by the Barbary pirates. The Catholic Church even had a specific religious order, the Trinitarians, solely dedicated to buying the freedom of Christian slaves held by Barbary pirates. However, due to the massive numbers of Christian sailors in captivity, the cost of purchasing the freedom of every slave held was simply beyond the order's financial means, and so only a tiny minority would be lucky enough to take advantage of this path to freedom. For the majority of European governments, simply buying off the pirates proved to be the most cost-effective way of dealing with the problem, and so regular and often excessively large sums of cash were paid to keep the pirates from attacking a particular nation's trade ships and capturing their crews. This led to a bizarre situation where some of the mightiest nations in Europe were forced to pay tribute to men whom they considered to be little more than savage outlaws. Yet paying the leaders of the Barbary states this protection money simply made the pirate fleets even stronger, adding another lucrative revenue stream to the already blossoming business enterprise. However, things were about to get even worse for the Europeans. In the east, the mighty Ottoman sultans had long taken an interest in the exploits of their Muslim brothers in the faith in North Africa, recognizing that this tidal wave of piracy could only weaken Ottoman rivals in Europe. Hoping to control and wield the Barbary pirates as a weapon against their European Christian enemies, the Ottoman Empire made a deal with the Barbary states. In exchange for their allegiance to the Ottoman Sultan, the pirates were allowed to operate as fully autonomous vassals under the protection of the empire, so long as they agreed to unleash their brand of plunder and carnage against enemies of the Sultan. The pirates now had the full backing of the sprawling Ottoman Empire. Anyone who wished to curtail the activities of the Barbary pirates would have to face the full wrath of the Ottoman Sultan's numerous armies and navies. Under the leadership of Admiral Barbarossa, a feared pirate chieftain who had been appointed commander of the Ottoman navy, the Barbary pirate fleet stepped up their attacks, emboldened by the safety net offered by their new Ottoman patrons, winning several major pitched battles against European fleets and generally wreaking havoc in the Mediterranean, until the power of the Ottoman navy was finally broken at the Battle of Lepanto in 1571. When a Christian holy alliance of Spain, the Papal States, Venice and Genoa smashed the Ottomans in a now legendary seaborne battle that drastically altered the balance of power in the Mediterranean. However, if the Europeans hoped that this decisive victory over the Ottomans also meant the end of the Barbary pirate threat, they would be sorely disappointed. Without the lucrative assistance of the Ottomans, the greatly enlarged Barbary pirate fleets now had to once again sustain themselves through piracy alone. They no longer sought open battle against European military targets, and instead focused all of their efforts on slave hunting, raiding and plundering civilian settlements, and looting merchant fleets. Subsequently, the 17th century saw the pirates' activity reach its greatest extent, and it's thought that during this period alone, hundreds of thousands of Europeans were enslaved at the hands of the Barbary pirates. However, increasingly it was not just fishermen and traders who were kidnapped, but ordinary residents of coastal villages. With Europe divided by war and religious strife, governments and even entire royal dynasties found themselves virtually powerless to curtail the Barbary pirate menace, the marauding African fleets greedily taking advantage of their prey's weakness. With their bold attacks on land usually going unanswered, the pirates increasingly found the confidence to leave the safety of their ships and come ashore to attack and plunder rich but lightly defended towns with impunity, seizing hundreds and sometimes even thousands of unfortunate residents from their homes. Moving further afield from the traditional hunting grounds in the Mediterranean, more and more Barbary fleets dared to hunt as far away as England, Ireland, and even Iceland, with some crossing the Atlantic to attack the Newfoundland fishing fleet. In August 1625, a Barbary fleet raided Mounts Bay in Cornwall, England, taking 60 men, women and children as slaves, while numerous other ports along England's southern coast suffered a similar fate that same year, resulting in the eerie sight of entire fleets of English fishing ships aimlessly drifting in the Channel, their crews kidnapped and sent to the Ottoman slave markets. With no significant naval resistance to deter them, for decades the Barbary fleets went almost unchallenged wherever they ventured, and it's thought that at any given time some 60 Barbary men of war were prowling the waters around the southern English coast. Attacks on English towns and villages were happening on an almost daily basis, with the situation becoming so bad that increasing numbers of fishermen refused to head out to sea and leave their families unprotected ashore, threatening to collapse the entire fishing industry. In December 1640, a government committee was set up specifically to oversee the ransoming of captives, and it's thought that at this time as many as 5,000 English prisoners were held in Algiers alone. Charities were established to try and buy back some of the English slaves, and local fishing communities raised as much money as they could in an effort to liberate their own stolen people. The government attempted to fight back, decreeing that any captured pirates should be taken to Bristol and slowly drowned, and although a nearby island pirate base was attacked and bombarded, the raids continued unabated. Ireland suffered similar attacks, and most famously in June 1631, Barbary pirates sacked the village of Baltimore in County Cork, taking away almost all of the villagers to a life of slavery in North Africa. Similar raids occurred all over Europe, however it was the coastlines of Spain, Italy and the Mediterranean islands that bore the brunt of the pirates' wrath, and much of the region's architecture today still hints at this trauma from the past. The many watchtowers and forts dotted along Mediterranean coastlines were built to warn and defend against pirate raids, while the narrow, twisting streets and alleys of now picturesque fishing villages were intentionally designed this way to help fleeing villagers evade capture. The labyrinth-like layout intended to confuse raiders, the narrow streets easier to barricade, while the constant twists and turns helped to shield fleeing villagers from enemy fire. In the face of this constant threat, many simply abandoned their homes and fled inland to safety, leaving once thriving, prosperous towns as depopulated and deserted ruins that would not see life again for centuries. Although it's impossible to say just how many European slaves were taken by the Barbary pirates, the most respected estimate is that between the 16th and 19th centuries alone, around 1 million to 1.25 million people were taken to the slave markets, the vast majority of whom would never see home again. For those unfortunate souls arriving at their new homes, a grim fate awaited. Many were sold off as servants, labourers or concubines, destined to live out a life of abuse, mistreatment and outright suffering. However, perhaps the worst and most feared fate of all was to end up as a galley slave. Permanently chained to their oar, the slave ate, slept and worked at the seat to which they were shackled, enduring hours of back-breaking labour every day in suffocating heat and humidity, subjected to incessant whippings at the hands of cruel overseers for the entirety of the voyage, which could be as long as 80 to 100 days, all the while knowing that their sweat and suffering was powering their prison galley on its hunt for new slaves to join them. Permanently confined to their ships, many galley slaves would never set foot on shore again. Perhaps the most well-known account of life as a Barbary slave is taken from the writings of one of the lucky few who escaped captivity and returned home. Olafur Egilsson was taken from his home on the Icelandic coast in July of 1627, and his eyewitness account offers a dramatic yet disturbing glimpse into what a Barbary pirate raid was like and the conditions which slaves endured after being sold. He describes how an otherwise ordinary morning was transformed into a living nightmare as 300 Barbary pirates rushed ashore with violent speed across the island like hunting hounds, howling like wolves. Egilsson continues, "The pirates quartered the island, capturing people wherever they found them, young and old, women and men and infants. They chased after people in their houses, across the mountain slopes, in caves and holes, and killed everybody who fought against them. The dead lay everywhere. Only a few of the people who were strongest or had nothing to carry or did not pay attention to anybody else managed to avoid capture. I and my poor wife were among the first to be taken. Eggleston, his wife, and their children were taken along with nearly 400 other Icelanders to a slave market in Algiers. Before being put up for sale, the human cargo was first divided fairly amongst the crew according to strict contractual obligations. The ship's captain got whichever two of the captives he wanted. The local chieftain took every 8th man, every 8th woman, and every 8th child, with half of the prisoners remaining given to the ship owners, and the other half given to the rank-and-file pirates. The slaves were brought to market in groups of 30 and had to be closely guarded not just to prevent them from escaping, but also to prevent the local inhabitants from stealing them away. Once at the slave market, Eggleston's 11-year-old son was chosen by the chieftain and taken away, with his wife suffering a similar fate. Despite this trauma, Eggleston never gave up hope, and rather than allowing despair to swallow him, he came up with an escape plan. Appealing to his captors' greed, he convinced them to allow him to travel to Denmark to arrange and collect a ransom payment from the Danish king for his family and the other Icelanders, since Iceland at the time was under Danish control. Seduced by the possibility of a large payment from the royal coffers, the Barbary pirates agreed, and Eggleston departed for Denmark to try his luck. However, his request for ransom was denied. 1 year after his initial capture, Eggleston returned to his native Iceland alone. He would wait for 10 more years before finally a ransom payment for 35 enslaved Icelanders was arranged, one of whom was Eggleston's wife, the pair reuniting for a couple of years together until he finally passed away. Eggleston's son would never be seen or heard from again. His fate remains unknown. Surprisingly, the Barbary pirate who led the raid on Eggleston's village in Iceland was a Dutchman named Jan Jansen, a former Dutch privateer against the Spanish during the 80 Years' War, who turned renegade. After being captured himself by Barbary pirates, Jan converted to Islam, took the name Murat Reis, and became a Barbary pirate under the famed Algerian raider Suleiman Reis, eventually rising to lead his own raiding expeditions and even becoming the leader of an independent Barbary pirate republic. In fact, the story of Jan Jansen is not unique, and many other disillusioned European privateers would join the Barbary pirates in search of fame and fortune, earning themselves reputations just as fearsome as any of their North African colleagues. Yet it wasn't just individual Europeans who supported and directed Barbary raids. The rampant piracy pouring out of North Africa was tolerated and indeed indirectly supported far longer than it should have been by naval powers who by the 18th century could have easily crushed the Barbary pirates with a concerted military campaign. Instead of destroying or suppressing the pirates, many European governments used them as a convenient tool to attack and harass the shipping of their rivals, bribing the pirates to leave their own shipping alone, and encouraging them to prey on the vessels of weaker nations who couldn't afford to pay off the pirates. This nefarious strategy protected the trade dominance of larger nations and suppressed competition from smaller rivals without risking outright war in Europe. However, time was running out for the Barbary pirates. By the 19th century, the world was changing fast. Slavery, particularly the enslavement of Christians, could no longer be tolerated by the great powers of the world, and with the technology and weaponry of Western Europeans fast outmatching anything the Barbary states could produce, the empire of fear and plunder they had ruled over for so many centuries was about to come crashing down. One of the first nations to break with the old blackmail and tribute model was the newly formed United States. By 1801, the US government was being extorted for up to 1/5 of its entire budget each year by the Barbary pirate kings. However, this humiliation could be tolerated no longer. Rallying behind the slogan, "Millions for defense but not 1 cent for tribute," the American people demanded that the US government build up the US Navy to break the power of the pirate fleets once and for all, and in 1801 the first Barbary War against the pirates was carried out, followed by a second war in 1815, two of America's first foreign military campaigns, which saw US naval ships successfully attack Barbary pirate bases in North Africa in an effort to bring them to heel. These US wars against the pirates were closely followed by similar military action by France and Britain, and by 1830 the Barbary states had been completely subdued and incorporated into the French Empire, ending the centuries-long reign of terror. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you again soon.